What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? That was the question looping in Sarah Jennings' head as she stood in what used to be her backyard, now reduced to smoking ash and twisted metal. The late afternoon sun was hazy, diffused by the smoke still hanging over Los Angeles like a ghost refusing to leave. The fires had swept in fast, faster than anyone predicted, and her home in Pacific Palisades, a place she had poured her savings and soul into, was gone. Just like that. Her dog Max had been rescued by a neighbor, thank God, but everything else? Irreplaceable. The fire department did what they could, but the blaze overwhelmed resources. She was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a shock so deep it felt unreal. This wasn't supposed to happen to her. She was organized, smart, and prepared, or so she thought. The irony didn't escape her that she specialized in designing environmentally conscious homes, meant to withstand California's increasingly intense climate conditions. She had even given talks on resilience planning. And yet, she stood here now, helpless, broken, staring at what used to be her life. The news trucks had already left. The world moved on fast. But something unexpected happened 2 days later. A black Tesla Model X rolled up the block, slow, cautious, silent. Out stepped Elon Musk. Not security. Not PR people. Just him. Dressed in black, sunglasses on, and strangely approachable. People on the street looked stunned. Some filmed on their phones. Sarah didn't move. She watched as he surveyed the devastation, nodding occasionally, absorbing everything. Then his gaze landed on her. She expected him to nod and move on. Instead, he walked over. "You live here?" he asked. His voice was softer than she expected. She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. "I saw your story," he continued. "On Twitter." "I'm sorry." She blinked. "You saw my story?" Her voice cracked. "Yeah. You're the architect, right? Sarah Jennings?" She gave a hesitant nod, feeling vaguely surreal. "I liked your talk on adaptive structures. Smart stuff. We need more of that." She didn't know what to say. Elon Musk was complimenting her work while she stood in the middle of her life's ruins. "You planning to rebuild?" he asked. I don't know yet," she said. "Everything's gone." He studied her, then said, "Let me show you something. Come with me." That should have been the moment she politely refused. But something about the look in his eyes, focused, intense, yet human, made her trust him. She nodded again. He led her to his car and opened the door. She got in. The next hour would change her entire life. As they drove, he explained that he'd been working quietly with local groups and engineers on a clean energy micro-housing project in the aftermath of the fires. Prototypes had been built using Tesla's battery tech and solar roofs, and the goal was to test them right here in LA, helping those displaced by the fires. "I wanted to do something now," he said. "Not just talk about the future. You know." Sarah nodded. She did. They arrived at an industrial site near Hawthorne. A cluster of futuristic modular homes stood in sharp contrast to the gritty surroundings. They looked sleek, minimal, and somehow hopeful. Each unit was self-powered, fire-resistant, and built in under a week. "These are temporary solutions," he said. "But the idea is to build smarter, longer-term housing that works with nature, not against it. That's where you come in." "Me? I need someone who gets it." "You do." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw someone who wasn't just a billionaire CEO, but a man on a mission. Whether she agreed with everything he did didn't matter at that moment. He was offering her a way to do something meaningful when her world had just fallen apart. She spent the next 2 days sleeping on a friend's couch in Santa Monica and the days touring sites with Elon and a small team of engineers and designers. Word spread quickly online, Elon Musk personally visiting fire zones, talking about rebuilding LA, partnering with local talent. People called it a publicity stunt. Others called it visionary. Sarah didn't care about the headlines. She saw how serious he was. She also saw how broken her city was. On the third morning, she woke up before dawn, sat on the beach with Max, and made her decision. She was going to help rebuild Los Angeles. Not just physically, but emotionally, structurally, spiritually. She messaged Elon one sentence: "I'm in. Let's make it count." That same day, she began working with his team full-time. They moved fast. Within a week, Sarah was leading design meetings, pushing ideas that balanced beauty, utility, and sustainability. She spoke with city officials, attended tense neighborhood meetings, and answered hard questions about gentrification, displacement, and the balance between innovation and community. Elon backed her every step. She wasn't just a consultant. She became the face of the new initiative, Project Renew. And it all started because someone she never expected to care actually showed up. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the fires, before Elon Musk, before the chaos, Sarah Jennings was already fighting a different kind of battle, one most people never saw. On the surface, she had it all together: an award-winning architect with a growing reputation in sustainable design, a sleek modern home in the Palisades with panoramic canyon views, and a dog that every passerby stopped to pet. But behind that calm, curated exterior was a life marked by fractures and doubts she never let the world see. Sarah was born and raised in Fresno, California, the only child of Greg Jennings, a stern and principled fire captain, and Diane, a soft-spoken schoolteacher who died when Sarah was 12. That loss reshaped her world like an earthquake, sudden, permanent, and unrelenting. Her father, devastated and buried in grief, became more rigid, more distant. He threw himself into his job, spending nights at the station, weekends training younger firefighters, and every spare second avoiding any emotional connection with the daughter who so desperately needed him. Their home became quiet, filled with invisible rules. Don't cry. Don't ask questions. Don't be a burden. Sarah learned early how to survive emotionally on her own. She was a top student, partly because books didn't yell, and math problems never pulled away. While her classmates went to birthday parties and hung out at the mall, Sarah stayed in the school library, sketching futuristic cities and obsessing over green buildings, wind energy, and solar panels. She didn't want to live in a world where things just broke and burned and disappeared. She wanted to design something permanent, something that could withstand the storms. Her father didn't understand it. Architecture, he scoffed the day she got her acceptance letter to USC's School of Architecture. That's a luxury. Real jobs save lives. They fought. Often. Loudly. And when she finally moved out at 18, she didn't look back. They spoke occasionally, birthdays, holidays, but there was always a polite distance, as if they both agreed not to revisit the fire still smoldering between them. USC was a revelation. Los Angeles was sprawling and chaotic and beautiful, filled with art and grit and limitless inspiration. She devoured every studio session, every class. While other students focused on commercial high-rises and flashy designs, Sarah always circled back to the question: how do we build homes that protect people? After graduating with honors, she took a job at a well-known firm in Silver Lake, then left after 2 years to start her own practice, Jennings Studio. At first, it was small projects, backyard ADUs, remodels, and green upgrades. But her reputation for clean, modern, environmentally sound design grew fast. She won a city competition to redesign a burned-out hillside using recycled materials. She gave TED-style talks on sustainable housing at community events and once appeared in an NPR segment on climate-resilient urban planning. Her name began popping up in city forums, environmental blogs, and architecture magazines. She was building more than homes, she was building a vision. And yet, she was alone. Her romantic relationships never lasted. She didn't trust easily, and every time things got too close, she'd pull back. Her closest bond was with Max, the rescue she found shivering behind a dumpster in Venice during a thunderstorm. He was loyal, quiet, and constant, everything she needed. She had friends, yes, a small circle of creatives and planners who admired her drive and dedication, but she kept her private self tightly wrapped. That was the cost of control, and control was her lifeline. But cracks were beginning to show. Her business was growing faster than she could manage. She was exhausted, overextended, and trying to juggle permits, client expectations, environmental pushback, and the ever-increasing burden of Los Angeles bureaucracy. Sometimes she'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a panic, certain she'd forgotten to file something or missed a zoning meeting. Her father, meanwhile, had retired and moved north to Redding. They hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since their last phone call ended with him calling her reckless for designing in fire zones. "You can't control nature," he said. "You're setting people up for heartbreak." She had yelled back that defeatism wasn't a strategy, then hung up before he could respond. She hadn't heard from him since. And then the fires came. Raging down the hillsides with a fury no one anticipated, they devoured homes in minutes, jumping from tree to rooftop to brush-covered canyon like they were hunting. Sarah had just finished a meeting in downtown when she got the call from her neighbor. Her home was under mandatory evacuation. She sped across town, breaking traffic laws and ignoring everything except the thought of Max. When she got there, smoke filled the street. Sirens screamed. Her neighbors were rushing, shouting, weeping. Her house was half a mile from the worst of it, but the wind had shifted. She found Max cowering under the patio table and scooped him up. The next few hours were a blur. They made it out. Her house didn't. The next morning, she stood at the police barricade, looking through the smoke at a smoldering wreckage. The roof had collapsed. Her office was gone. The blueprint archive she kept in fire-safe storage, melted. Her computer, her photographs, her mother's necklace, obliterated. Gone, like a second funeral. The city declared it a disaster zone. FEMA trucks rolled in. And Sarah? She was just one more displaced person in a city full of them. The press didn't care. Her studio's clients called to cancel. One left a voicemail saying, "Sorry, but we need someone who can actually deliver." That night, she slept in her car with Max, curled up in the back seat in a grocery store parking lot. She felt humiliated, angry, and impossibly tired. She wanted to call her dad but didn't. She didn't know what she'd say. "I lost everything. I was wrong. You were right." She couldn't say those words, not yet. The only thing she knew for sure was this: she needed to keep moving. Even if every part of her wanted to collapse. Even if it meant rebuilding from zero. She was scrolling her phone the next morning, trying to find any updates about the area when she saw the tweet, "Rebuilding doesn't have to be broken. We need to rethink fire zones, housing design, and city planning. Fast. Los Angeles can be better, if we stop pretending the old way works." #Future of LA, the author. Elon Musk. She rolled her eyes at first. Another billionaire making noise. But something made her click the thread. He wasn't just talking theory. He was referencing actual data. Burn paths, structural failures, weaknesses in the grid. Then came the part that made her heart stop, a link to her presentation from a year ago on fire-resistant construction, with a caption that read, "More of this. We should be building this way already." Her talk had 80,000 views. Now it was over 2 million. Her inbox flooded. Journalists. Planners. Random citizens offering condolences or collaboration. That night, when Elon showed up in her neighborhood, it felt surreal, but not impossible. Like maybe, just maybe, the worst moment of her life was the beginning of something else. She wasn't sure if it was fate, coincidence, or dumb luck. But she knew one thing: everything that had shaped her, every strained word with her father, every long night building her firm, every blueprint she'd ever drafted, was leading her to this moment. She was tired of surviving. She was ready to build. Sarah hadn't even unpacked her emergency duffel when the first wave of resistance hit. It started with a zoning board email, then a tersely worded message from a local community association: "We are not interested in becoming guinea pigs for billionaire experiments." That line stung more than she expected. She was used to pushback. It came with every design review, every budget pitch, but this was different. She wasn't some outsider dropping in with abstract ideas. She was a resident, a victim of the same flames they were. Still, people were angry. The trauma was fresh, and Elon Musk's involvement, while headline-grabbing, was a powder keg. Some saw him as a savior. Others, a symbol of privilege swooping in to co-opt a tragedy. She sat in a folding chair at a city council meeting that first Monday, wearing jeans, no makeup, still smelling faintly of smoke. The room was packed. Survivors, media, developers, city reps, all crammed into a converted gymnasium where microphones barely worked and tempers flared easily. When her name was called, she stood up and tried to steady her voice. "I'm Sarah Jennings. You may know me from the fire. I lost my home just like many of you. I'm not here to promote a billionaire's agenda. I'm here because I know how to rebuild in a way that might actually survive the next fire. We can keep doing what we've always done, or we can try something new." The silence was thick. A man in the back yelled, "Are you getting paid to say this?" Another woman shouted, "Where was Musk last year when the housing bill failed?" It spiraled fast. The moderator banged the gavel, but it was chaos. Sarah stepped down, heart pounding. Elon wasn't at the meeting. She wasn't even sure he knew she'd spoken. She didn't call him that night. She walked Max through the ashes of her neighborhood instead, feeling like a ghost of her former life. The next morning, her inbox was full again, some support, but mostly hate. One subject line read, "Traitor." She scrolled past it and focused on work. The design center was a leased space in a low-rise industrial zone in El Segundo, shared with Tesla engineers and SpaceX project leads. It looked more like a startup than a planning office: whiteboards crammed with notes, coffee cups everywhere, half-built prototypes of walls and roofs that could fold, resist heat, collect rain. Elon dropped in twice that week, sometimes for only 10 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. He never made small talk. He'd ask questions like, "What if a wildfire hits and there's no power grid?" or, "Could these walls be printed on site?" Sarah liked it. He moved fast, thought in systems, and trusted her expertise. But the pressure mounted. Every day brought new obstacles: legal, political, emotional. Permits were slow. Neighbors protested. One construction crew quit mid-project, saying they didn't want to be involved in a media circus. Even within Elon's own network, there were tensions. One of his operations leads, a sharp-tongued woman named Lizette, openly questioned Sarah's experience. "We're trusting an architect whose house burned down," she sneered in a planning meeting. Sarah gritted her teeth. "Yeah. Because I know exactly what doesn't work." Elon didn't say anything in the moment, but later he sent her a one-line text, "You're doing better than 99% of people I've worked with." She screenshotted it. Read it twice before deleting it. She didn't want to get starstruck or dependent. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was still a city on fire. As they pushed forward, media attention intensified. Sarah found herself fielding interview requests from NPR, Vice, even BBC. She said no to most. She wasn't interested in being a celebrity. She just wanted to build. But then came the first real test, Evie Ortega. A single mother of two whose home had been wiped out in the same fire. She lived 3 blocks from Sarah's old house. Her story went viral after a GoFundMe raised $250,000 in 2 days. Evie was a nurse, had no insurance, and had been living in her car with her kids. Sarah met her at a site walkthrough for the first full-scale prototype home. It was beautiful, sleek angles, self-cooling panels, integrated solar windows, but Evie wasn't impressed. "This doesn't feel like a home," she said flatly. "Feels like something a tech company thinks poor people should live in." The comment cut deep. Sarah tried to explain the materials, the airflow design, the resilience under stress. But Evie didn't care. "I need something that feels like my abuela's kitchen. Something my kids aren't scared to sleep in." That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She went back to her sketches and started over. No sweeping future aesthetics. Just warmth. Texture. Shelter. She pulled up old photos of her own childhood home. The one from before her mother died. Soft lights. Rounded corners. A porch swing. The next week, she presented a new version to Elon's team. "It's not flashy," she said. "But it feels like home." Elon nodded once. "Build it." 2 weeks later, they handed the keys to Evie. Her kids ran inside, shrieking. Evie cried. So did Sarah. That should have been a victory. Instead, it sparked a media firestorm. Local papers ran stories accusing Elon of using tragedy to beta test his housing tech. Protesters picketed the site. One day someone threw a brick through the construction office window with a note that said, "No tech colonizers in our city." Sarah felt the walls closing in. She began questioning everything. Was she helping or making things worse? Was this the right way? Elon didn't flinch. "Ignore the noise," he told her. "Noise is the price of progress." Easy for him to say, she thought. He wasn't the one being followed to her car by angry activists. He wasn't the one who found, "Go back to Silicon Valley," spray-painted on her studio door. Her father called for the first time in months. He'd seen the protests on the news. "Are you safe?" he asked. His voice was rough, but it wasn't angry. "I'm trying to be," she said. "You could come up here for a bit. Just to get your head clear." She almost said yes. But she looked out the window at the framework of the new community center they were building, designed to run off-grid, double as a cooling station, and provide job training for displaced workers, and she shook her head. "I'm not done yet." That weekend, a journalist published an op-ed calling Sarah, the accidental architect of Elon Musk's urban laboratory. She hated the label. But it stuck. And it brought new attention, from activists, city leaders, and even celebrity donors who wanted to fund more units. The mayor's office invited her to a closed-door meeting. Sarah sat across from people who had once dismissed her ideas outright. Now they wanted plans. Proposals. Solutions. That night, Elon called. Not text. Voice. "This thing's getting bigger than us," he said. "You ready?" She looked down at Max, sleeping on her lap, and out at the city skyline smeared with haze. "I'm not sure," she said. "But I'm in." She didn't know it yet, but the real conflict was only beginning. What started as a rebuilding effort was turning into a movement. And not everyone wanted Los Angeles to change. Not everyone believed a woman who lost her house could help rebuild a city. The morning it all shifted, Sarah stood ankle-deep in red mud behind what used to be a strip mall in Reseda. Heavy rains followed the fires, turning scorched hillsides into landslides, and now a fresh layer of disaster blanketed the city. A neighborhood that hadn't burned was now buried, roads flooded, basements swamped, and emergency crews stretched to their limit. Sarah was soaked through, her hands numb, but she was here with a clipboard, a drone operator, and a site planner with wide eyes and muddy boots. This wasn't just about fire anymore. The city's entire resilience system was collapsing under pressure. Infrastructure hadn't been built to withstand climate stacking, wildfire, drought, flood, heat. The very homes they were trying to build now had to face a cascade of disasters. That day, Elon showed up again. Not with a camera crew, not with fanfare. Just in a rain-streaked black jacket, standing beside her in the mud. "It's happening faster than we modeled," he said without greeting. "Climate compounding. It's like nature's playing chess 5 moves ahead." She nodded. "We're still building for yesterday." He looked at her. "Then let's stop." That conversation launched a second phase of Project Renew. Elon greenlit the expansion of their modular housing to include dynamic foundations, systems that could adapt to both fire and flood. They brought in hydrologists, urban ecologists, and even behavioral psychologists to help them rethink not just buildings but how people lived in emergencies. Sarah wasn't just drawing blueprints anymore. She was helping design policy. Working with city officials, she advocated for new zoning overlays that encouraged resilient design. She argued for community-led development boards to approve designs so local culture wasn't erased by efficiency. But it wasn't just theory. They were building on the ground, fast. The first multifamily pod opened in Baldwin Hills, 12 units connected by shared green space and a central community shelter equipped with a water purification system and solar battery backup. The tenants were families displaced by fires, floods, and eviction. Sarah spent her nights there sometimes, listening to their fears and stories, adjusting plans in real time. One night, a 10-year-old boy named Isaiah told her he liked the windows because they made the sky look calm. She went back to the team and redesigned the upper levels to include sky-facing sleep pods, specifically for children traumatized by sirens and smoke. The work consumed her. She barely slept. Her father left 3 voicemails in a row, worried, then angry, then silent again. She didn't respond. Her studio team was overwhelmed. The city still pushed back, wary of being too closely tied to Musk's name. Protesters continued, though their voices were changing. Some began to ask questions instead of shout. Others volunteered to help. A few joined the site teams. But with growth came scrutiny. The state launched a review of their funding. A major newspaper ran an exposé questioning the ethics of fast-tracked permits and whether Elon's influence had bypassed democratic process. Sarah was dragged into it as the public face. She was called idealistic, opportunistic, even complicit. During a city hall hearing, a council member leaned forward and asked her bluntly, "What makes you think you know how to rebuild this city better than anyone else?" She felt her throat tighten. Then she took a breath. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. Because I lived here. Because this isn't a theory to me, it's personal. And because I'm not asking anyone to believe in a promise. I'm asking them to walk into these homes, talk to these families, and decide for themselves if this is better than tents and trauma." The room fell quiet. The council member said nothing. After the hearing, someone slipped her a folded note, "Don't stop. We see you now." But not everyone was on board. One evening, the original prototype house, Evie's, was set on fire. Arson. The damage was limited, but the message was clear. Not everyone wanted change. Not everyone believed in hope. Sarah stood in the ash again, heart hammering, and felt the past looping back around. This time, though, something was different. Evie was standing beside her. "We rebuild," Evie said calmly. "That's what we do." Elon called an hour later. "You good?" he asked. "No," she replied honestly. "But I'm going to keep going." "Then we double down," he said. LA isn't just a project anymore. It's a proving ground. He proposed something bold, a partnership with the city to build the first climate-resilient urban corridor in the U.S., a stretch of interconnected housing, schools, shelters, and transit hubs designed for fire, flood, and heat, powered off-grid, with a circular water system and AI-based emergency response. It's not just homes anymore, he said. It's a system. A living city spine. Sarah stared at the proposal draft, her mind racing. It was ambitious, borderline impossible, but exactly what LA needed. The cost would be astronomical. The red tape, endless. The backlash, inevitable. But so was the future. They launched Phase 3 in Koreatown, an area with high density, diverse culture, and real risk. Sarah embedded with local leaders, listening instead of pitching. She didn't want to save communities. She wanted to work with them. She brought on cultural architects, multilingual teams, even an elder council. Every building was co-designed. Every street corner surveyed for accessibility, safety, dignity. And slowly, the tide began to shift. Critics started acknowledging results. Media pieces became less skeptical. Community forums turned from protest to debate, then dialogue. Elon told her, "This isn't a side project anymore. This is a model. Cities are watching. So were investors. So were lawmakers. So was the rest of the world." Sarah gave her first national interview on PBS, calmly walking through a unit in East LA with flood-resistant flooring, air filtration modules, and a community farm on the roof. "We're not trying to make the future flashy," she said. "We're trying to make it livable." Her father called that night. She picked up this time. "I watched your interview," he said. She didn't speak. "You were good," he added. "I'm proud of you." The words landed like a healing wound, still sore, but closing. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. "You were right about some things," he admitted. "So were you," she replied. They didn't fix everything in that moment. But it was a start. That week, a letter from FEMA arrived. Her original home was officially declared unrecoverable. She sat with the envelope for hours, then walked down to the community complex she helped design and watched as a group of children painted murals on the side of the shelter wall. They didn't need the past back. They needed what came next. She pulled out her sketch pad. Started drawing again. The journey had shifted from survival to design to legacy. She wasn't just rebuilding a house or a neighborhood. She was helping imagine a city that didn't just endure disaster, but adapted, resisted, grew stronger. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. It wasn't always fair. But it was happening. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Jennings wasn't running from fire. She was walking straight into the future. The morning of the summit felt electric, like something huge was about to happen and everyone could feel it but no one wanted to say it out loud. Sarah stood backstage at the Los Angeles Civic Auditorium, her palms sweating slightly despite the air conditioning, her mind spinning through every detail of the speech she had rewritten 6 times overnight. The Climate Cities Initiative Summit was a big deal. Mayors, planners, architects, scientists, and international observers from more than 40 countries packed the seats. Los Angeles, once dismissed as a hopeless tangle of asphalt and fire risk, was now at the center of a conversation about urban transformation. Elon was scheduled to speak last, as the anchor, the visionary, the celebrity. Sarah, somehow, was opening. She wasn't used to this level of attention. She didn't wear power suits. She didn't love being on camera. But she had built something real and people had taken notice. The night before, Evie had texted her a selfie of the new porch with her kids wrapped in sleeping bags beneath soft yellow lights. "We're home," it read. That gave Sarah the strength to walk on stage. The applause when she entered was louder than expected. She took a breath. 2 years ago, I stood in front of what used to be my house. There was nothing left. Just ash, smoke, and a feeling I couldn't shake, that something had gone fundamentally wrong with how we build, how we live, how we prepare for the world around us. Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept going. Today, I'm standing in a city that's learning how to change. Not perfectly. Not easily. But honestly. Los Angeles isn't a lost cause. It's a living experiment. We've built modular homes that can stand through fire. Communities that can survive blackouts. Cooling centers that double as schools. These aren't fantasies. They're blueprints. They're real. And they're only the beginning. She showed before and after images, real stories from the pilot blocks in Reseda, Boyle Heights, Baldwin Hills. She showed data, decreased emergency calls, lower utility bills, higher neighborhood safety reports. But it was the human stories that landed. She finished with a quiet photo of Isaiah's Skyview pod and said, "This isn't about buildings. It's about the feeling of calm after chaos. The chance to breathe again. The right to feel safe in your own home." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Her throat tightened. She smiled, blinking back tears. It should have felt like a victory. But that afternoon, something went terribly wrong. Elon's keynote never happened. As he prepared to go on stage, he received an urgent call from a field site near San Bernardino. One of the beta communities had experienced a structural failure. A flash flood had overwhelmed a drainage canal that hadn't been properly reinforced, and part of a housing pod shifted off its base. No one was killed, but 2 residents were hospitalized. The media exploded. Detractors pounced. One headline read, "Tech Dream Turns Dangerous, Can Elon's Housing Vision Be Trusted?" Sarah raced to the site. When she arrived, the damage was visible, a wall cracked open, furniture floating, mud everywhere. One woman screamed at her across the parking lot, "You said it was safe. You said we'd be safe." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. She bent to help lift debris, but her hands shook too hard to grip the wood. Elon arrived 20 minutes later, flanked by engineers. "Full review," he said immediately. "Get everyone out. We rebuild it better." Immediately. Sarah looked at him, expecting anger or blame. But all he said was, "You okay?" She nodded, but she wasn't. That night, she sat in the emergency shelter with a notepad on her lap and tears streaking her face. She felt like a fraud. The cameras had been there for the ribbon cutting, but now? Now it was pain and doubt and fear all over again. She thought of her mother, how she used to hold Sarah's hand during storms, whispering, "We're safe, baby. No matter what." But Sarah didn't feel safe. She felt like she was unraveling. That night, she called her father. "I messed up," she said. "People trusted me." He was quiet. Then he said, "You didn't mess up. You built something nobody else had the guts to try. Failure doesn't make you a failure." "What if I can't fix it?" she whispered. "Then you start over." That's what we do. The next day, she stood in the mud and addressed the residents face to face. No press. No spin. Just the truth. "We failed you. And we will make this right. Not by talking. By doing. We will rebuild this home and every home that needs it." Some were still angry. Some didn't believe her. But some stayed. And some even helped. The emotional climax wasn't a ribbon or a headline. It was the moment Sarah realized the future wasn't about never falling. It was about how quickly, and how truthfully, you stood back up. Elon gave a quiet press briefing the following week. Mistakes happen. The difference is whether you learn or lie. We're choosing to learn. And to keep building. Sarah returned to work with a deeper fire than before. She tore apart the designs that had failed. Brought in new teams. Doubled the water drainage capacity. Elevated the next models higher off the ground. She refused to let shame stop her. The rebuild took 6 weeks. The families moved back in. And this time, no cameras were invited. No press releases. Just quiet relief. One child left a note on the kitchen counter of the new pod, "This time, I know it won't fall." Sarah taped it to her office wall. That moment marked a shift in how she worked. No more ego. No more trying to prove anything. She was here to build things that lasted, and that meant listening more, adjusting often, and never assuming the work was done. Elon, too, changed. He pulled back from the spotlight, focusing on engineering and strategy. He trusted Sarah more visibly now, letting her take the lead publicly. When an international agency visited to tour the project, Elon declined the meeting and said, "Talk to Sarah. It's her city now." That stunned her. But it also pushed her forward. She gave the delegation a tour of the corridor under construction, energy pods, food hubs, water capture systems, all interconnected. She explained that resilience wasn't a product. It was a culture. A way of thinking that wove dignity into design. By year's end, Project Renew had expanded into 4 counties. FEMA integrated parts of their model into national recommendations. And Sarah? She slept more. Smiled more. Designed better. And she no longer avoided the part of her story that hurt. She used it. She walked into town hall meetings and said, "I lost my home. But I didn't lose my purpose." That was the moment people started seeing her not just as Elon's architect, but as LA's architect. A woman who stood in the ashes and built something strong enough to stand in the storm. That emotional weight, the burden and the breakthrough, became her compass. And it would guide her through the final battles ahead. The day the first climate-resilient urban corridor officially opened, the sun rose through a soft marine layer, casting golden light across what used to be cracked sidewalks and empty lots but was now a connected stretch of modular housing, vertical gardens, microgrid energy nodes, solar-cooled community centers, and transit loops linking schools, shelters, and small businesses all powered independently from the city's aging infrastructure. Sarah stood on the roof of one of the early builds, where native plants now bloomed from recycled soil, and stared out over a city that no longer looked like a warning. It looked like a beginning. A soft breeze carried the sounds of music and laughter from the community plaza below where kids were dancing, seniors were gardening, and former skeptics were clapping alongside planners, builders, and residents. There were no stages, no speeches, no ribbon cutting. Just life, returning. Elon arrived quietly, like he always did when the work was real. No cameras, no entourage, just a nod in Sarah's direction as he stepped beside her, hands in pockets, taking in the view. "You did it," he said after a moment. She shook her head. "We did it. And we're not done." He smiled. "We'll never be done. Cities don't stop. They evolve." The rest of the day unfolded like something from a dream Sarah never let herself fully imagine before. A mother she'd never met handed her a handwritten thank you card. A teenager gave her a tour of the solar battery closet he'd helped install. A community leader asked her to help design their next project, an elder care unit that could double as a cooling center. It was the kind of legacy work Sarah used to think only other people got to do. The kind of life where you could look at a map and see your fingerprint on it. Later that week, a national news anchor described her as the architect who gave Los Angeles a second chance. Sarah laughed when she heard it. It wasn't a second chance. It was the first time anyone had tried to listen to what the city really needed. What its people knew all along but never had the resources to build. That night, as she sat under the stars on her own small balcony in her own small unit, one she helped design but never tried to make flashy, she opened her sketch pad and drew something she hadn't drawn since architecture school, her mother's kitchen. The one with chipped tile, soft yellow paint, and a window that caught the light just right in the mornings. She didn't know why, but it felt like the right time. A reminder that the past didn't need to be erased to build the future. It could be woven in. A few weeks later, Sarah was invited to speak at the White House. She almost didn't go. Not because she didn't appreciate the honor, but because she was afraid the work would become too distant, too political, too polished. But Evie convinced her. They need to hear from someone who actually lived it, she said. Someone who didn't just draw the plan but walked the ashes. So Sarah went. She stood at the podium and talked about design, yes, but also about grief. About losing your home and finding your purpose. About how love for your city isn't soft, it's the strongest thing there is. She ended with a simple truth. We don't need to fear the future. We just need to be brave enough to build it differently. The room was silent for a beat. Then someone stood. Then another. Then everyone. Back in LA, the work continued. More corridors. More community designs. A training program to teach high school students architecture and engineering for resilience. A microloan fund for small business owners who wanted to build sustainably. A research partnership with a local university to track long-term outcomes. Sarah became more than an architect. She became a mentor. A guide. Someone people came to not for blueprints, but for belief. And Elon? He pulled back further, directing energy into Mars, space, but always keeping one hand on the work in LA. Occasionally they'd talk late into the night, not about tech but about legacy. You don't change the world with scale, he told her once. You change it with story. Sarah understood that now. Because this wasn't just about fire-resistant homes or self-cooling walls. It was about people seeing what was possible. It was about walking through a rebuilt neighborhood and feeling like hope had a shape. Like the future wasn't something to fear but something to co-create. One afternoon, while visiting a school built from their modular design, a little girl tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Did you build this? She asked. Sarah knelt. I helped. A lot of people helped. The girl nodded seriously. When I grow up, I want to help too. Sarah smiled. You already are. That evening, she returned home, set her sketchpad aside, and finally unpacked the last box she had carried from her burned-down home 2 years earlier. Inside was a photo of her mother, holding her as a baby in front of that old chipped kitchen window. She placed it on her desk. Not as a memorial. But as a compass. That photo reminded her that love, not technology, not funding, not fame, was the real foundation of any city. The reason anyone ever fought to rebuild. That's what the story had always been about. Not Elon. Not headlines. Not even climate. But connection. Home. And the belief that even in the aftermath of fire and loss and fear, something new could grow. Something stronger. Wiser. More human. The kind of place where a girl who lost everything could help build something for everyone. In the final entry of her journal that year, Sarah wrote one sentence: we didn't rebuild the city we lost, we built the one we always deserved. And she meant every word. Because Los Angeles was no longer just a city on the edge of disaster. It was a city standing on the edge of possibility. And people were watching. Learning. Ready to follow. Not because Elon Musk said something. But because someone like Sarah proved it could be done. It started with a glitch no one noticed at first, a spike in internal battery temperatures across several units in the newest Koreatown corridor during a rare heatwave. Then a sensor flagged a voltage irregularity. Then another. Within 12 hours, 3 homes were evacuated as a precaution, and by morning, 2 more reported flickering lights and disabled climate systems. Sarah was in the design center when the alerts came through. She didn't panic. Not yet. Issues like these came with scaling. But by mid-afternoon, a message from one of her project leads hit different. The AI response queue is stacking. It's not rerouting load. Something's wrong with the grid handshake. That meant the core system, the one designed to let each building respond independently in a crisis while still collaborating across the corridor, wasn't doing its job. A few years ago, that kind of issue would have belonged to IT. Now, it was urban survival. Elon joined the remote call an hour later from a SpaceX hangar. We've got 5 hours before the heat index breaches the critical threshold. After that, internal temps could spike past 95 degrees. His voice was calm, clipped. Sarah, I need your decision. Do we keep the grid live or isolate the nodes? If they isolated the nodes, each unit would run solo, using only its own storage, risking blackout in the weakest homes. If they kept the grid unified and the bug spread, it could crash the corridor. Sarah's hand hovered over the emergency control dashboard. Dozens of families. Elderly residents. Children. A system she had designed, one she believed in. And now it was wobbling under pressure. Run the rebalancer first, she said. If we don't stabilize in 30 minutes, we isolate. For 29 minutes, nothing changed. Then, line by line, the nodes began to recover. The battery temps leveled. Climate units kicked back in. The crisis passed. Barely. But the questions didn't. That night, a city official called her directly. How many more of these failures are we going to see? Sarah didn't have an answer. And in the silence that followed, she realized that trust, once earned, was fragile. Elon sent a simple text later, good call. But we're flying too close. Time to check the whole system. The next day, she pulled every single plan back on the table. She halted the next rollout phase. Ordered third-party audits. Some of her own staff pushed back, said the bug was patched, that optics mattered, that stopping now might scare off funders. But Sarah wouldn't budge. If we don't slow down when things get shaky, we're no better than the old system we're replacing. That week, she walked into every unit affected by the heatwave glitch. Knocked on doors. Sat on couches. Listened. One woman said, I thought this place would protect us. For a minute, I didn't feel safe anymore. Sarah didn't defend herself. She just said, I'm sorry. We're going to make sure that never happens again. The audits revealed deeper issues, overextended protocols, firmware lag, pressure to deploy too fast. Not fatal. But dangerous if ignored. Elon backed her call to delay expansion, even when headlines started calling the project paused and critics declared it a failed experiment. Let them talk, he told her over a late-night debrief. It's not failure. It's the friction that proves you're doing something real. But Sarah felt the pressure mounting again. Public opinion was splintering. Lawmakers who once praised her were now hesitant. Funding timelines tightened. Some of her staff began to burn out. It wasn't just about fixing homes anymore, it was about proving this whole new system could survive scrutiny, politics, and public fear. She remembered the fire again, the night she lost everything, and how easy it was for systems to collapse when no one had built for failure. She wouldn't let that happen here. So she reworked the protocol stack. Created redundancies. Made transparency mandatory across all nodes. Published her findings online. Not just the wins. The vulnerabilities too. It earned her backlash, and respect. One night, she sat on her rooftop, alone again, wondering if the arc of the project was bending too far, if even this second life she'd carved out for herself could endure the weight of expectation. She thought about her mother's old kitchen again, the chipped window, the way the light felt simple, and for a moment, she closed her eyes and pictured it as if it were still real. She opened her sketchpad. Not to design, but to breathe. She scribbled a single phrase, protect the human first. Everything else is the frame. The next day, she pinned that phrase in the war room. And the work shifted. Not toward scale. Not toward publicity. But toward soul. She added psychological safety features to the design stack. Red buttons in every unit that connected to live human help, not just automated scripts. She invited trauma therapists into the planning phase of future sites. She asked elderly residents to help redesign outdoor areas, not just for access, but for joy. The movement that had begun as resilience architecture was becoming something more emotional, more intimate. Cities were calling. But so were survivors. The ones who didn't need a smart grid, but needed somewhere to exhale without fear. Sarah no longer spoke about innovation. She talked about rest. Safety. Dignity. She stopped going to tech conferences and started visiting places no one talked about in press releases, trailer parks in the high desert, burned-out zones on the outskirts of Ventura, communities where help never came fast enough. And what she saw, over and over again, wasn't hopelessness. It was readiness. People were hungry for change. But they needed someone who would stay, not just promise. That's what Sarah did. She stayed. She didn't give up when the press moved on. When the money got harder. When Elon shifted more of his attention back to Mars. She understood now. This wasn't his story. Or even hers. It belonged to the people who lived in the corridors. Who watered the rooftop tomatoes. Who fixed the solar array when the inverter blinked. Who painted murals of their grandparents on the shelter walls. That was the true proof of concept. Not that the tech worked. But that people had made it their own. 1 year after the Koreatown bug, she walked through that same neighborhood. The sky was blue. The AI grid was humming, stable. Children chased each other past flower beds and a row of community fridges that never went empty. She saw the woman who had once told her she didn't feel safe. They hugged. No words. Just warmth. That night, a message from a city planner in New Orleans hit her inbox. Can you help us design something for storm season? We don't want to wait until it's too late. Sarah smiled. She didn't feel exhausted anymore. She felt ready. She didn't know what the next chapter would bring, or how long the world would keep listening. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just a Los Angeles story. It was a blueprint. And it had only just begun. The call from New Orleans came with urgency in its tone but something deeper underneath, a kind of cautious hope. The city had been burned before, flooded and failed by promises too big to keep and leaders too quick to leave. When Sarah flew in, the humidity wrapped around her like a wet blanket and memories of her own beginnings came back sharply. A city under stress, fighting not just weather but memory. The resilience corridor model they had piloted in Los Angeles wasn't a plug-and-play formula. It had to bend with the culture, the land, the people. In New Orleans, it couldn't just be solar panels and smart grids. It had to be music and front porches and second lines and kitchens that could withstand both floods and feasts. Sarah started the same way she always did now. Not with designs but with listening. She met with pastors, school principals, grandmothers who had outlived 6 hurricanes, kids who talked about the sound of rain with wide eyes and anxious fingers. We don't want to evacuate every time, one woman said. We want to stay and know we'll be okay. Sarah nodded. Then we'll build for that. She brought in teams, not from California but from Gulf-adjacent regions, people who understood the codes, the climate, and the culture. The first test site was in the 9th Ward, a neighborhood once decimated, still overlooked. They converted an abandoned grocery store into a community resilience hub, with elevated housing units stacked above storm-proof power stations and cooling rooms lined with hammocks and art. It didn't look like LA. It looked like New Orleans, because it was made for New Orleans. The reaction was swift. Locals started showing up just to sit in the cool air and talk about what they needed. Kids played outside after dark for the first time in years. Sarah heard one man say, "Feels like somebody finally remembered we live here." That was the moment she knew this model had legs, not because it traveled but because it transformed. It became whatever the people needed. Word spread. Calls came from Phoenix, Miami, parts of the Midwest hit by tornado swarms. Not flashy mayors or billion-dollar budgets. But real people. Organizers. Nurses. Teachers. "We saw what you did in LA," they'd say. "We want to try." Sarah's team grew, carefully. She refused to scale like a tech company. No rapid franchising. No sacrificing intention for reach. Every site had to be locally rooted. Every community had to lead. Elon supported her but had clearly shifted gears, back to Mars, Neuralink, the edge of imagination. Sarah didn't take it personally. She knew now that his gift was ignition. But hers was follow-through. And that was what mattered in the end. She visited cities with lead-tainted pipes, others with heat islands where asphalt melted shoes. She met a mother in Detroit whose kids slept in a car for 3 months because the air inside their apartment was toxic. She met elders in Houston who taught her how to gut drywall in 6 minutes flat after a flood. Everywhere she went, she asked the same question: "What does safety look like to you?" The answers weren't always technological. Sometimes it was a pantry that stayed stocked. A backup generator that didn't fail. A hallway wide enough for a wheelchair. A window that let light in after too many years of dark. Sarah began to write a new doctrine, not a manual but a manifesto. She called it the Human Infrastructure Project. It centered 3 things: dignity, adaptability, and memory. Dignity meant that no matter how resilient a structure was, if it felt sterile, foreign, or imposed, it would never become home. Adaptability meant systems had to be dynamic, not fixed, able to shift with rising temperatures, new data, or community change. And memory? Memory was what gave these projects soul. They had to remember who lived there, what they lost, what they feared, and what they hoped. Only then could resilience take root. The document circulated among city planners, non-profit leaders, and eventually federal agencies. Soon, parts of it showed up in HUD proposals, in FEMA pilot programs, even in UN climate reports. But Sarah kept her head down. She wasn't trying to be famous. She was trying to keep people alive, and beyond that, let them live fully. In one of the newer builds in Phoenix, she added something she hadn't before: music. Outdoor speakers powered by solar trickled jazz into the courtyards at sunset. It wasn't necessary for survival. But it reminded people they were still allowed to feel joy. A little girl named Maya danced under the courtyard lights with bare feet and a plastic tiara. Sarah watched her spin and thought, this is why we build. Not for headlines. Not for billionaires. But for barefoot children who've seen too much and still choose to dance. She thought about her mother again, how she used to sing while cooking, even when the bills were late and the walls cracked. She wondered what her mom would say now if she could see all this. "You kept going," she might whisper. "You didn't let it break you." The media tried to frame Sarah's rise as the woman who outgrew Elon. But she hated that narrative. Elon had never claimed to be the hero. He had opened the door. She had walked through it. And now? Now she was holding the door for others. One of her proudest moments came not on a stage, but in a conference room where she watched 3 local teenagers from the Koreatown corridor present their prototype for a modular bus stop that could collect rainwater and serve as a cooling station. They used her original sketches as a reference point. They didn't ask for permission. They just started building. Sarah clapped so hard her hands ached. "That's the future," she said to her colleague afterward. "When they don't need me anymore." She was still needed, of course. But differently now. Less as an architect. More as a mentor. A systems thinker. A bridge between vision and reality. Between policy and pavement. The work was far from finished. Climate stressors grew fiercer. Fires more unpredictable. Floods deeper. But the difference now was that people weren't waiting to be saved. They were preparing. Designing. Leading. She saw it everywhere, in murals, co-op meetings, DIY shelters reinforced with solar tarps. The culture was shifting. Safety was becoming collective. Not an individual escape, but a shared responsibility. One night, back in Los Angeles, she walked the original corridor. It looked older now. Worn in. Real. Kids rode bikes down the middle of the once cracked street. An old man waved from his porch. Somewhere nearby, a generator hummed quietly. She thought of how it all began, how broken she'd felt, how impossible it all seemed. And yet here she was, not at the end, but at a turning point. A voice message came through from Evie, just wanted to say thank you. Again. My youngest starts school next week. And I'm not afraid anymore. Sarah stood still. Let the words settle. Then she looked up at the stars, not as a metaphor but as a reminder, even in the vast dark, there is always light. What Elon Musk said about LA might have surprised people. But what LA said back was louder. It said, we're not done. We're not broken. And we know how to build now. Together. Change never comes without resistance, and Sarah knew that better than most. As the resilience corridors began to take root across cities, a growing number of critics emerged from unexpected places. Some local politicians accused the project of being an expensive luxury, arguing that funds would be better spent on traditional infrastructure. Others from established utility companies branded the smart grids and AI-managed energy flows as risky, untested experiments that could leave neighborhoods vulnerable rather than protected. The media, hungry for controversy, quickly amplified these voices, painting Sarah's initiative as a Silicon Valley fad that ignored the realities on the ground. You're building castles in the air, one headline read. The timing couldn't have been worse. The summer's heatwave rolled in with relentless intensity, pushing power demands through the roof. Traditional grids struggled to keep up. In some places, rolling blackouts returned with a vengeance. Meanwhile, a fault in one of the newer resilience corridors in Atlanta caused a temporary shutdown, sparking widespread frustration and fears that the new system was unreliable. Sarah felt the weight of it all. Emails poured into her inbox, some filled with encouragement, others dripping with doubt or outright hostility. She met with city officials who questioned whether the project was sustainable or just a temporary novelty. There were nights she lay awake, replaying every decision, every risk. Was she moving too fast? Was she asking too much of a system still learning to breathe? Yet, amidst the noise, there were voices of clarity and support. Residents who had survived the blackouts because their corridors held steady. Community leaders who credited the project with saving lives during the worst heat days. Young engineers inspired to join her team after visiting the hubs. Sarah realized this battle wasn't just about technology, it was about trust. And trust, once broken, was painfully slow to rebuild. She decided to face the resistance head-on. Sarah organized an open town hall in Los Angeles's Koreatown corridor, inviting critics, supporters, city officials, and residents alike. The event hall was packed, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. She began by acknowledging the mistakes. We're not perfect. We had a setback in Atlanta. We hear your concerns. But every failure is a lesson, and every lesson brings us closer to the solution. Then she shared stories of families whose power stayed on during the heatwave, of neighbors coming together to check on each other because the system gave them the tools to do so. She showed data, transparent, raw, and unedited. On what had worked and what hadn't. The mood began to shift. Questions became less accusatory and more curious. People wanted to know how they could help, how they could be part of the solution. Sarah realized that resistance wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the beginning. After the town hall, she launched a public advisory board made up of residents, technical experts, and city planners. Together, they co-created updates to the system's design and governance. Power, she insisted, couldn't just be distributed electronically, it had to be distributed socially as well. Meanwhile, the media narrative slowly began to change. Reporters who had once dismissed the project started to highlight personal stories of resilience, innovation, and community pride. The Silicon Valley fad label faded, replaced by a recognition that this was a grassroots movement powered by real people. Yet the fight was far from over. A coalition of utility companies pushed back harder, lobbying against regulations that favored decentralized energy solutions. They launched campaigns warning that the corridors would destabilize existing grids and drive up costs. Sarah found herself in meetings with lobbyists and policymakers where the stakes felt impossibly high. She called on Elon for advice. His response was simple: keep your head down and your vision clear. You're not just building infrastructure, you're shifting the future of energy and community. Sarah doubled down on collaboration, opening channels with utility companies willing to engage rather than oppose. Some cautiously joined pilot projects, exploring ways to integrate the resilience corridors with existing infrastructure. Slowly, a hybrid model emerged. One that leveraged the strengths of both centralized and decentralized systems. But the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A community organizer in Detroit, inspired by Sarah's approach, developed a peer-to-peer energy sharing platform that allowed residents to trade surplus solar power and resources locally. It was a game-changer, an example of technology enabling new forms of cooperation and trust. Sarah's team integrated this innovation into their core design, expanding the concept of resilience beyond hardware to the social fabric itself. The emotional toll on Sarah was intense. She struggled to balance her role as a visionary leader with the daily grind of conflict resolution. There were moments when the cynicism felt overwhelming, when it seemed easier to walk away and return to a quieter life. But each time, she thought of the people depending on her. The children dancing under the courtyard lights, the elderly neighbors who smiled when the lights stayed on, the communities rising from the ashes of disaster. Those moments became fuel. She realized that resilience was not just about bouncing back but about pushing forward with courage despite uncertainty. And so she pushed. She hosted workshops to train local leaders in technology, governance, and emergency response. She encouraged community storytelling as a tool for healing and education. She fostered partnerships with artists, educators, and activists to keep the project grounded in human experience. Over time, the resilience corridors became more than infrastructure, they became living, breathing ecosystems of care and innovation. One afternoon, during a site visit to a new corridor in Miami, Sarah met a young woman named Anna who had grown up in a flood-prone neighborhood. Anna shared how the new system allowed her family to stay in their home during last year's hurricane, providing clean water, power, and a communication lifeline when everything else failed. "You gave us more than technology," Anna said. "You gave us hope." It was a reminder that at the heart of every challenge lay a chance to transform pain into possibility. Sarah understood then that her journey was part of something larger, a movement redefining what it meant to belong to a community in a changing world. As the sun set over Miami's coastline, she felt a quiet determination settle within her. Resistance would always be part of the process. Reckoning would always demand strength. But the blueprint was spreading, and with it, a new way of imagining cities, neighborhoods, and the bonds that hold us together. What Elon Musk said about LA may have surprised many, but what the people of LA and beyond had done in response was even more remarkable, a testament to human resilience, connection, and the unyielding drive to build a better future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? In the world of urban resilience, alliances were often unpredictable. Sarah had learned this early on, as she navigated the complex web of city officials, activists, engineers, and everyday residents. But nothing prepared her for the unexpected coalition that formed one brisk morning in Chicago. It began with a simple message, a request for a meeting from a surprising source, an executive at one of the largest fossil fuel companies in the Midwest. The invitation sparked skepticism among her team. Could a company whose business was tied to an industry often blamed for climate change really be interested in resilience? Was this a PR stunt, a distraction, or something else entirely? Sarah decided to meet them anyway. She believed in the power of conversation, even with unlikely partners. At the sleek corporate office, she was greeted by Robert Stanton, a man whose polished demeanor masked a palpable urgency. Robert explained that the company was facing increasing pressure from investors and regulators to pivot toward sustainability. They saw the resilience corridors not as a threat but as an opportunity, to innovate, to diversify, and to rebuild their image in a changing world. "We want to be part of the solution," Robert said, his tone earnest. "We have resources, expertise, and reach. But we need guidance on how to transition responsibly." The meeting sparked intense discussions. Some on Sarah's team worried about compromising values. Others saw the potential for scale and impact. Sarah herself wrestled with the tension between pragmatism and principle. Could she trust a company so entrenched in fossil fuels to genuinely support her vision? She decided to test their commitment with a pilot project in a Chicago neighborhood vulnerable to flooding and pollution. The company would fund infrastructure upgrades but under strict community oversight and environmental standards. The pilot became a proving ground for collaboration. Local residents, activists, and company engineers worked side by side, sharing knowledge and concerns. They retrofitted homes with solar panels, installed rain gardens, and created educational programs about air quality and energy use. Over time, barriers began to dissolve. Robert attended community meetings regularly, listening more than speaking, and slowly building rapport. Residents who had once been skeptical started to see the company as a partner rather than an adversary. The project's success caught the attention of city officials and environmental groups. It became a model for how even the most unlikely allies could contribute to resilience. Encouraged, Sarah began to explore other unconventional partnerships. She reached out to religious leaders, finding shared values in stewardship and care for creation. Together, they launched initiatives that combined spiritual healing with practical resilience measures, like emergency preparedness workshops and mutual aid networks. She collaborated with artists to transform neglected spaces into vibrant community hubs that celebrated local history and culture while serving as storm shelters and resource centers. Universities joined in, bringing research power and young minds eager to innovate. These alliances enriched the resilience corridors, making them more than physical infrastructure but living communities of shared purpose. Yet challenges persisted. Some activists remained deeply skeptical, fearing co-optation or dilution of the original vision. Sarah listened carefully, acknowledging their concerns and reaffirming her commitment to transparency and community leadership. She knew trust could not be rushed or manufactured, it had to be earned through action and accountability. One particularly tense moment came when a major tech company proposed to integrate their proprietary AI system into the corridors. The technology promised greater efficiency but at the cost of user privacy and local control. Community advisory boards debated fiercely. After weeks of dialogue, they negotiated a compromise that maintained essential privacy protections and ensured local oversight of data. The incident became a landmark case in balancing innovation with ethics. Through these experiences, Sarah deepened her understanding that resilience was as much about relationships as it was about technology. It was about embracing complexity, managing conflict, and building bridges where none seemed possible. Meanwhile, Elon Musk watched from afar, his attention focused on Mars but occasionally reaching back with encouragement. He saw the project evolve from a daring experiment into a dynamic movement reshaping how cities approached survival and hope. Back in Los Angeles, Sarah attended a conference where she was surprised to see Robert Stanton among the speakers. He shared the story of the Chicago pilot, emphasizing the need for industries to engage honestly with communities to create lasting change. The applause was cautious but sincere. Afterward, Sarah and Robert met privately. They discussed expanding their collaboration to other cities and investing in clean energy infrastructure. The conversation was pragmatic but hopeful. It was a moment of reckoning for Sarah, realizing that the fight for resilience was bigger than any one person or ideology. It required embracing imperfections and building unexpected alliances. As she walked away from the meeting, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But the growing network of partners, from grassroots organizers to corporate executives, from artists to scientists, showed that transformation was possible when diverse voices came together. That night, she reflected on how far the project had come, from a single corridor in Los Angeles to a national movement knitting together communities with threads of hope and innovation. What Elon Musk had said about LA had sparked a conversation. What LA and the country were now doing was rewriting the story of urban resilience for a new generation. The future remained unwritten, but Sarah knew one thing for certain. It would be forged not by solitary heroes, but by collective courage and unexpected alliances. As the resilience corridors expanded, Sarah began to notice something she hadn't expected: the shadows of the past refusing to stay buried. History, she realized, was never truly gone. It lingered beneath the surface of every neighborhood, every street corner, every cracked pavement. In cities across the country, decades-old wounds were reopening, often in ways that complicated her mission. In Detroit, for example, the legacy of redlining and industrial pollution created deep distrust among communities already battered by economic decline. Efforts to build resilience there faced skepticism not just about technology or governance but about whether any change could really benefit those who had been ignored for generations. Sarah remembered a conversation with Marcus, a local activist who carried the weight of his neighborhood's history in his eyes. "It's not just about power and water," Marcus said. "It's about who gets to decide what's important. Who gets to rebuild and who gets pushed out." These words haunted her. She understood that resilience could not be built on ignoring systemic inequities or repeating the mistakes of the past. She needed to confront these shadows head-on. Back in Los Angeles, Sarah arranged a series of community forums focused on history and resilience. She invited historians, sociologists, and longtime residents to speak openly about past injustices and their impact on current vulnerabilities. These conversations were raw and emotional, sometimes tense, but they also opened pathways for healing and understanding. In one session, a grandmother shared how her family had been displaced during urban renewal projects decades earlier, forced into overcrowded housing with little support. Her story was echoed by others who had lost homes, businesses, and community networks in the name of progress. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes but also learning to sit with discomfort. She realized that resilience wasn't just about infrastructure but about memory and justice. Inspired, Sarah's team began integrating historical context into their designs. Resilience corridors were mapped with attention to neighborhoods historically marginalized, ensuring they received priority investment and community-driven planning. Public art installations commemorated lost communities, honoring their contributions and struggles. Educational programs taught young people not only about climate adaptation but also about the social history that shaped their environment. Yet the shadows proved persistent. In some areas, gentrification pressures increased as new infrastructure projects raised property values and attracted outside investors. Longtime residents feared being priced out of neighborhoods they had fought to survive in. Activists raised alarms, demanding stronger protections against displacement. Sarah faced difficult choices. She advocated for policies that linked resilience funding to affordable housing guarantees and tenant protections. She partnered with legal aid organizations to support residents facing eviction. But she also confronted limits, economic forces and political dynamics often beyond her control. In moments of doubt, Sarah thought back to her own family's history of struggle and survival. She remembered her mother's words, "You don't just build for today. You build for the ones who come after. Those words gave her strength to persevere. At the same time, new revelations surfaced about environmental racism and corporate negligence in certain project areas. Toxic waste sites were uncovered beneath planned resilience corridors, forcing expensive cleanups and delaying construction. Community anger flared, demanding accountability from local governments and private companies. Sarah became a vocal advocate for transparency and justice, pushing for community-led environmental assessments and remediation efforts. She formed alliances with grassroots groups and environmental lawyers, elevating their voices in policy discussions. The journey was exhausting but necessary. Through these challenges, Sarah's leadership matured. She learned to navigate complexity with humility, to balance hope with realism. She embraced the idea that resilience was not a destination but a continuous process, one that required confronting uncomfortable truths as much as celebrating victories. One pivotal moment came during a public hearing in Chicago, where plans for a new resilience corridor intersected with a neighborhood still healing from years of disinvestment and violence. Residents packed the room, some supportive, others deeply wary. Sarah spoke honestly about the project's goals but also its limitations. She acknowledged past harms and committed to ongoing dialogue and partnership. After the meeting, a young man approached her. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "But actions matter more than words." He wasn't just a critic, he was a potential ally demanding proof. Sarah accepted the challenge. She worked closely with community leaders to co-design the project, incorporating their feedback at every stage. Together, they launched job training programs to ensure local residents benefited directly from new construction and maintenance jobs. They established neighborhood oversight committees with real decision-making power. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. The corridor became a symbol not only of climate resilience but of social justice in action. Throughout this chapter of her journey, Sarah discovered that resilience without reckoning was incomplete. The past could not be erased, but it could be acknowledged and addressed. Only then could communities truly move forward. As the sun set over the city skyline, Sarah stood on a rooftop garden atop one of the new corridor hubs. She looked out over neighborhoods still marked by scars but also by new growth. She thought about the people whose stories she carried with her, the displaced grandmother, the skeptical activist, the young man demanding action. Their voices were woven into the very fabric of the Resilience Project now. What Elon Musk said about LA may have surprised the world, but what LA and so many other cities were doing was rewriting the narrative of urban survival, one that included shadows and light, pain and possibility, history and hope. The pressure was mounting. As the resilience corridors grew, so did the expectations, and the cracks in the system began to show. Sarah found herself navigating a series of breaking points, moments when everything seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. The first came during an unrelenting heatwave in Phoenix, where temperatures soared beyond anything the city's aging infrastructure had ever endured. Despite the advanced designs, one of the main corridors experienced a critical failure. The AI-driven cooling systems overloaded, triggering cascading blackouts across several neighborhoods. Residents, already exhausted by the heat, faced hours without power or water. Social media exploded with frustration and anger, blaming the new technology and those who had promoted it. Sarah was thrust into crisis mode. Her team worked around the clock to identify and fix the fault, while she communicated directly with affected communities. She made public apologies and promised transparency. The failure was a harsh reminder that innovation carried risks and that resilience was never guaranteed. But the breaking points weren't only technical. Internally, Sarah's team was strained. Months of intense work, conflict, and emotional labor took their toll. Some key engineers left, exhausted by the relentless pace and public scrutiny. Morale dipped. Sarah faced difficult decisions about whether to slow down or push forward. One evening, during a late-night meeting, tensions boiled over. Voices raised, accusations flew, and Sarah realized she had to step back and rebuild trust within her own team. She organized retreats focused not only on problem-solving but on healing, reminding everyone of the project's mission and their shared commitment. These moments tested her leadership and resilience in ways she hadn't anticipated. At the same time, political pressures intensified. Some city councils grew impatient with setbacks and began threatening to pull funding. Lobbyists for traditional utilities ramped up their campaigns, stoking fear and uncertainty among the public and officials alike. Sarah knew she needed to reinforce the project's value and build broader coalitions. She redoubled efforts to involve community voices, organizing forums where residents could share their experiences and ideas. These gatherings became powerful platforms for storytelling and advocacy, helping to shift the narrative from failure to learning and growth. A critical breakthrough came when a group of local entrepreneurs proposed integrating resilience corridors with economic development programs. By linking infrastructure upgrades with small business support and workforce training, they created a model that boosted both community resilience and prosperity. Sarah embraced this holistic approach, recognizing that resilience was as much about economic and social strength as physical systems. Yet the breaking points kept coming. In Miami, a severe hurricane tested the corridors under extreme conditions. While many parts held, some hubs flooded due to unexpected storm surge levels. The damage was extensive, and rebuilding efforts strained resources. Sarah and her partners faced difficult choices about priorities and trade-offs. Meanwhile, the emotional toll on Sarah intensified. She grappled with self-doubt and exhaustion, questioning whether her vision was achievable. At moments, the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But she found support in unexpected places: a letter from a schoolteacher thanking her for keeping children safe, a message from a young engineer inspired to join the team, a late-night call from Elon Musk encouraging her to keep pushing forward. These small sparks of hope rekindled her determination. Through the breaking points, Sarah and her team learned vital lessons. They improved system redundancies, diversified energy sources, enhanced community engagement, and fostered a culture of transparency and adaptability. They understood that resilience was not a fixed state but a continuous journey of facing and overcoming challenges. What Elon Musk had said about LA had set the stage, but the real story was being written in the daily battles, the failures, the recoveries, the human connections that made all the difference. As the sun rose over a city slowly healing and evolving, Sarah stood ready to face whatever came next. The breaking points were painful but necessary, forging a stronger, wiser path forward. After months of relentless challenges and setbacks, something began to shift, a turning tide that promised new momentum and renewed hope for the Resilience Corridors project. Sarah sensed it during a morning briefing when the data finally showed a consistent improvement in system reliability and community satisfaction. The technical glitches that had once plagued the corridors were being resolved one by one, replaced by innovations born from lessons learned. In Los Angeles, the newest corridor segment became a beacon of what could be achieved through collaboration and perseverance. Neighborhoods once marginalized were now hubs of activity, featuring solar-powered parks, green roofs, and community centers doubling as emergency shelters. Local businesses thrived, supported by economic initiatives tied directly to the resilience effort. Residents spoke openly about how their quality of life had improved, not just because of better infrastructure but because they felt seen, heard, and valued. This transformation was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate strategies to embed equity and inclusion at every level of planning and execution. Sarah had pushed for participatory design processes, ensuring that residents shaped the corridors to meet their unique needs and aspirations. She fostered partnerships with nonprofit organizations skilled in community engagement, bridging gaps of trust and communication. At the same time, technological advancements accelerated progress. Breakthroughs in renewable energy storage, smart water management, and climate-adaptive materials made the corridors more efficient and resilient against extreme weather events. The integration of AI systems improved predictive maintenance, preventing failures before they occurred. These tools, however, were always framed by human-centered values, technology serving people, not replacing them. The turning tide also brought a shift in public perception. Media narratives changed from skepticism to celebration, highlighting success stories and innovative approaches. Influencers and local leaders shared positive experiences, amplifying the project's impact. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences and panels nationwide, inspiring other cities to consider similar paths. But despite the progress, Sarah remained grounded. She knew the journey was far from over. New challenges loomed on the horizon, rising sea levels threatening coastal corridors, political opposition resurfacing, and the ongoing need for sustainable funding. Yet, the spirit of resilience had taken root, visible in the growing network of communities committed to adapting and thriving together. One of the most significant markers of this turning tide came unexpectedly. A coalition of environmental justice activists, corporate partners, local governments, and residents came together to launch the Resilience Equity Fund, a pooled investment vehicle designed to finance projects that prioritized both climate adaptation and social justice. This fund embodied the core lessons Sarah had championed: resilience was inseparable from equity, and collective action was essential. The fund quickly raised millions, channeling resources to areas historically underserved and accelerating infrastructure improvements, education, and job creation. Sarah watched as the fund's success inspired similar efforts across the country. The turning tide also affected her personally. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence, tempered by humility and an awareness of the work still to come. Relationships she had nurtured through conflict and collaboration deepened, forming a strong foundation for future endeavors. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, finding support and inspiration. Elon Musk reached out with congratulations, noting how the project had grown beyond initial expectations, embodying a model of innovation fused with compassion. In a quiet moment on a rooftop overlooking the revitalized corridors, Sarah reflected on the journey so far. From the initial spark of Elon Musk's unexpected comments about LA, to the struggles with technical failures and community skepticism, to this moment of tangible progress, everything felt interconnected. The turning tide was a reminder that resilience was not a sprint but a marathon, requiring patience, adaptability, and unwavering commitment. She thought about the countless people who had contributed, the engineers and activists, residents and leaders, skeptics and believers. Each had played a role in shaping the future of their cities. The lesson was clear: change was possible when diverse voices joined forces around a shared vision. As night fell, the city lights twinkled like stars, a testament to human ingenuity and hope. Sarah felt ready to face the next chapter, knowing that with every challenge, the turning tide would carry them closer to a more just and resilient world. What Elon Musk had said about LA was only the beginning. The real story was unfolding now, powered by a community's courage to rise above adversity and chart a new course together. The crossroads arrived quietly but with unmistakable force, as if the city itself was holding its breath before choosing a path. Sarah sensed the shift months before it became obvious. The resilience corridors had reached a pivotal moment where competing interests, unresolved tensions, and emerging opportunities converged. She understood that decisions made now would define not just the project's future but the soul of the communities involved. At the heart of the crossroads was a question that seemed simple but carried enormous weight: how to balance growth and preservation. On one side was the push for rapid development, driven by technological optimism, economic incentives, and political pressure to deliver results quickly. On the other was the imperative to protect cultural heritage, environmental integrity, and community autonomy, values deeply embedded in the neighborhood Sarah served. The tension was visible everywhere. In East LA, developers proposed a sprawling mixed-use complex promising jobs and infrastructure upgrades but risking displacement of longtime residents and erasure of historical landmarks. Community activists organized protests and town halls, demanding more inclusive planning and legal protections. Sarah attended these meetings, feeling the weight of responsibility as she tried to mediate between opposing sides. She was haunted by memories of earlier projects where well-intentioned initiatives had inadvertently deepened inequalities. The stakes felt higher now because the corridors had become symbols of possibility. Failure to navigate the crossroads thoughtfully could unravel years of progress. Meanwhile, within her own team, opinions diverged. Some urged bold action to capitalize on momentum and secure funding. Others called for caution, emphasizing the need for deeper community engagement and environmental assessments. Sarah grappled with her own doubts and fears. Was she leading well enough? Could she hold these conflicting visions together without fracturing the fragile coalition? To find answers, Sarah sought out voices often overlooked in policy debates. She met with indigenous leaders who spoke passionately about ancestral land rights and the importance of ecological stewardship rooted in tradition. She listened to artists whose work captured the neighborhood's history and aspirations. She sat with youth organizers who envisioned a future where innovation respected diversity and justice. These conversations enriched Sarah's understanding and informed new approaches. She proposed a framework she called resilient coexistence, a commitment to develop infrastructure that honored cultural narratives, preserved natural habitats, and fostered inclusive economic opportunities. The framework emphasized shared governance, requiring developers and city officials to partner directly with community councils. At a high-profile city council meeting, Sarah presented the Resilient Coexistence Plan. The room was packed with stakeholders, politicians, business leaders, activists, residents, all eager to hear the proposal. She spoke clearly and passionately about the need for balance and the lessons learned from past mistakes. Her words resonated with many but also faced sharp critique from those who feared it would slow growth or impose too many restrictions. The debate was intense, stretching late into the night. Yet, through dialogue and negotiation, a compromise emerged. The City Council adopted key elements of the Resilient Coexistence Framework, committing to pilot projects that incorporated cultural preservation, environmental safeguards, and community-led economic development. The decision was hailed as a breakthrough in urban planning and resilience strategy. Back in the neighborhoods, the mood shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. Community members felt their voices mattered and that their history was valued. Developers adjusted plans to include affordable housing, green spaces, and cultural centers. Environmental groups partnered with construction firms to minimize ecological impacts. The corridors took on a new dimension. Not just physical infrastructure but living ecosystems where human and natural resilience intertwined. Sarah's leadership at the crossroads marked a turning point in her journey. She learned that navigating complexity required humility, patience, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. She understood that resilience was not a fixed goal but an evolving process shaped by dialogue and compromise. At the same time, she felt the personal toll. The relentless pressure and high stakes sometimes left her feeling isolated. Late nights alone with her thoughts reminded her of the importance of self-care and support networks. She reconnected with family and close friends, drawing strength from their love and perspective. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Sarah received a message from Elon Musk. He acknowledged the difficult choices she faced and encouraged her to trust her instincts and the community's wisdom. "The future is uncertain," he wrote, "but it is ours to shape together." Those words felt like a balm, reinforcing her resolve. As the city moved forward, Sarah knew the crossroads would appear again, new challenges, new tensions, but the experience had equipped her to face them with courage and compassion. The resilience corridors were no longer just a project, they were a living testament to the power of community, innovation, and shared vision. What Elon Musk had said about LA may have sparked curiosity and debate, but what LA was doing now was forging a path of resilience rooted in respect and coexistence. And that was a future worth fighting for. As the resilience corridors advanced deeper into the fabric of the city, Sarah became increasingly aware of unseen forces shaping the project's destiny. These forces weren't always tangible, some were cultural, others political or economic, but their impact was profound, influencing decisions and outcomes in ways that were easy to overlook. One of the most persistent unseen forces was the legacy of mistrust. Decades of broken promises and neglect had left many communities skeptical of even the most well-meaning initiatives. In neighborhoods where poverty and environmental hazards had long been normalized, resilience efforts sometimes felt like yet another experiment, one that could bring disruption without real benefit. Sarah understood this distrust stemmed from history, but it also persisted in everyday interactions. It showed up in wary looks during public meetings, hesitant participation in planning sessions, and whispered doubts among community leaders. To break through, Sarah committed to radical transparency. She insisted on sharing every detail of the project openly, from budgets and timelines to risks and uncertainties. Her team created accessible platforms where residents could track progress, ask questions, and offer feedback in real time. They hired community liaisons who lived in the neighborhoods and spoke the local languages and dialects. This approach gradually built bridges, though it required patience and consistent effort. Another unseen force was the shifting political landscape. Elections and policy changes brought new leaders with different priorities and visions. Some embraced the resilience corridors enthusiastically, others saw them as distractions from more immediate concerns or as threats to entrenched interests. Sarah found herself navigating a complex web of alliances, compromises, and occasional setbacks. She learned to frame the project in ways that resonated across political divides. Emphasizing job creation and economic growth to some, public health and safety to others, and climate leadership to yet others. Behind the scenes, lobbying efforts both for and against the corridors intensified. Traditional utility companies, real estate developers, and environmental groups each vied for influence. Sarah maintained a careful balance, advocating for the community's voice while managing the competing agendas. Economic forces also exerted unseen pressure. The influx of investment and development associated with the corridors fueled speculation and market shifts. Property values in some areas began to rise, sparking fears of displacement among longtime residents. At the same time, economic downturns or funding uncertainties threatened to stall projects midstream. Sarah and her team worked to mitigate these risks by integrating affordable housing policies, creating job training programs, and diversifying funding sources. But the economic currents were unpredictable, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. Beyond these more visible pressures, Sarah came to realize that psychological and cultural forces played a subtle but crucial role. People's relationship to place, how they saw their neighborhood, their identity, their future, shaped how they engaged with resilience efforts. For some, change stirred hope and excitement, for others, it triggered anxiety and resistance. Sarah's team brought in social scientists and anthropologists to better understand these dynamics and design interventions that honored cultural heritage while fostering openness to innovation. One of the most striking examples was a community art project that invited residents to share stories of their neighborhood's past, present, and hopes for the future. The project created a shared narrative that helped bridge divides and cultivate collective ownership of the resilience mission. Sarah herself felt the weight of these unseen forces deeply. The complexity of balancing diverse perspectives and interests often left her feeling pulled in conflicting directions. She faced moments of self-doubt and isolation, questioning whether she could meet the expectations placed upon her. In these moments, she leaned on her core belief that resilience was fundamentally about people, their courage, creativity, and capacity to come together despite differences. A breakthrough came when a coalition of community leaders and city officials launched a Resilience Advisory Council, designed to institutionalize ongoing dialogue and shared decision-making. The council included representatives from marginalized neighborhoods, environmental groups, business sectors, and government agencies. This body became a forum to address concerns, resolve conflicts, and co-create solutions. Its success was a testament to the power of acknowledging and working with unseen forces rather than ignoring them. As the corridors grew more complex and interconnected, Sarah realized that resilience was as much about navigating the invisible currents beneath the surface as it was about concrete infrastructure. The unseen forces, history, trust, politics, economics, culture, were the true landscape in which the project lived. What Elon Musk had said about LA might have been a catalyst, but the real transformation depended on recognizing and embracing these intangible realities. Standing in a community center surrounded by murals depicting stories of struggle and hope, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She saw that resilience was not a destination but a dynamic, living process shaped by countless unseen hands and hearts. This understanding gave her the strength to keep moving forward, ready to face whatever unseen forces lay ahead. The resilience corridors, once an ambitious vision confined to a few neighborhoods, began generating waves that rippled far beyond their initial boundaries. Sarah watched in awe as the project's influence extended into new cities and states, inspiring a movement that challenged traditional approaches to climate adaptation and urban planning. The ripple effect was not just physical infrastructure spreading outward. It was a shift in mindset and policy that redefined what resilience meant in America's most vulnerable communities. The first visible signs of this effect appeared in San Diego, where city leaders invited Sarah and her team to share lessons learned from Los Angeles. Officials were grappling with their own challenges: rising temperatures, water scarcity, and growing inequality. Sarah's presentations emphasized the importance of community-driven design and cross-sector partnerships, themes that resonated deeply. Inspired by LA's example, San Diego launched its own Resilience Corridors initiative, adapted to local conditions but rooted in the same principles of equity and innovation. Soon, cities like San Francisco, Denver, and Houston began exploring similar models. Networks of practitioners formed, exchanging data, best practices, and stories. The Resilience Corridors became a case study in urban resilience programs worldwide, featured in conferences, academic research, and media coverage. Sarah found herself at the center of a growing community of changemakers united by a common mission. The ripple effect also manifested in policy reforms. At the state level, California lawmakers introduced legislation to codify resilience standards into building codes and land use planning. Funding streams were created to support community-led projects, recognizing that top-down approaches often missed critical nuances. Sarah advocated for these policies, emphasizing that resilience required both structural investment and social empowerment. The ripple effect extended into education, where universities and vocational schools developed curricula focused on resilience science, sustainable design, and environmental justice. Internships and apprenticeships connected students to real-world projects, cultivating a new generation of leaders equipped to tackle complex challenges. These educational initiatives helped create a pipeline of skilled workers and innovators, further strengthening resilience efforts. On the ground, residents reported tangible improvements in their daily lives. Neighborhoods that once faced chronic flooding, power outages, or pollution now enjoyed safer streets, cleaner air, and reliable services. Small businesses thrived and revitalized commercial corridors, supported by local hiring and training programs. Social cohesion grew as people came together around shared goals and mutual support. These outcomes underscored that resilience was about more than infrastructure. It was about human well-being and dignity. The ripple effect also sparked debates about scalability and adaptation. Could the Resilience Corridors model work in smaller towns or rural areas? How could it be tailored to diverse cultural contexts? What role should private sector partners play without compromising community control? Sarah engaged with these questions through workshops and advisory roles, emphasizing the need for flexibility and local leadership. She recognized that resilience was not a one-size-fits-all solution but a framework adaptable to unique circumstances. The media played a pivotal role in amplifying the ripple effect. Documentaries, podcasts, and social media campaigns told the stories of resilience champions, from engineers and activists to everyday residents. These narratives humanized complex challenges and celebrated collective achievements, inspiring broader public support. Sarah appeared in several interviews, always highlighting the interconnectedness of people and place. One unexpected aspect of the ripple effect was its impact on mental health and community identity. As neighborhoods gained confidence in their ability to withstand shocks and stresses, feelings of empowerment and hope blossomed. This psychological resilience proved crucial in sustaining long-term efforts and fostering inclusive participation. Sarah partnered with mental health professionals to integrate emotional well-being into resilience programming, a move that garnered praise and expanded the project's holistic scope. However, the ripple effect was not without its tensions. Some critics argued that rapid expansion risked diluting core values or overburdening communities with new demands. Others worried about equity gaps widening as resources flowed unevenly. Sarah acknowledged these concerns openly, working to implement safeguards and accountability mechanisms. She emphasized continuous learning and adaptation, recognizing that resilience was an ongoing process rather than a fixed achievement. Reflecting on the ripple effect, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility. The project had grown far beyond what she had imagined, touching lives in ways both visible and invisible. Yet she knew the journey was far from over. Climate change and social inequality remained daunting challenges requiring relentless innovation and collaboration. What Elon Musk had said about LA had sparked a spark, but the ripple effect showed how that spark could ignite a movement. Standing at the edge of a newly completed corridor, watching children play in a shaded park powered by solar energy, Sarah felt a deep connection to the past and future. The ripple effect was proof that resilience was contagious, spreading hope, strength, and possibility in waves that could transform cities and lives for generations to come. As the resilience corridors expanded and the ripple effect gained momentum, Sarah came to understand that every story of progress carried with it shadows, unseen struggles, lingering doubts, and difficult compromises. Shadows and light became her way of describing the dual nature of the journey, where hope and hardship danced in constant tension. On the surface, the corridors were shining examples of innovation, equity, and community strength. Yet beneath that brightness, complex challenges continued to test the project's foundations. One of the most persistent shadows was the issue of gentrification. Even as affordable housing policies were put in place, rising property values attracted investors and new residents, creating pressure that threatened to displace longtime families. Neighborhoods that had fought to retain their identity now faced the risk of cultural erosion. Sarah found herself caught between the desire to improve living conditions and the imperative to protect community roots. The dilemma weighed heavily on her, fueling difficult conversations with residents and colleagues. She realized that resilience had to include social and cultural preservation as much as physical infrastructure. Another shadow was burnout, both personal and collective. The relentless pace of work, high stakes, and emotional intensity drained many team members. Volunteers and community leaders, though passionate, faced fatigue and resource shortages. Sarah took steps to promote self-care, mental health support, and sustainable work practices, recognizing that resilience required nurturing the people who built it. Political pushback also cast long shadows. Not everyone welcomed the transformative vision of the corridors. Some politicians questioned the costs or challenged the priorities, while entrenched interests resisted changes that threatened their influence. Sarah had to navigate these currents carefully, balancing advocacy with diplomacy. The fight for funding and policy support was ongoing, requiring persistence and adaptability. Environmental uncertainties compounded these shadows. Despite technological advances, climate impacts intensified unpredictably. Heat waves, wildfires, and storms tested the corridor's durability and response capacity. Each event was a reminder that resilience was a continuous struggle against nature's forces. The project's success depended on vigilance, innovation, and community readiness. Yet in the midst of these shadows, light persisted, manifested in breakthroughs, connections, and moments of profound meaning. Sarah recalled a community gathering where an elderly resident shared how the corridors had saved her home during a flood, expressing gratitude and renewed faith in collective action. She thought of young activists who organized cleanup campaigns, blending environmental stewardship with cultural pride. These lights illuminated the path forward, offering proof that resilience was not just survival but thriving. Artistic expressions also captured the interplay of shadows and light. Murals, music, and performances told stories of struggle and hope, weaving the community's past with visions of the future. Sarah supported these creative endeavors, seeing them as essential threads in the fabric of resilience. They gave voice to experiences often overlooked and fostered empathy and solidarity. On a personal level, Sarah faced shadows and light in her own life. Moments of doubt and exhaustion were balanced by the joy of seeing tangible change and the strength of relationships built along the way. She grew more comfortable embracing imperfection and uncertainty, recognizing that resilience was as much about mindset as strategy. A turning point came during a wildfire season that threatened multiple corridors simultaneously. Emergency response systems, community networks, and infrastructure were put to the test. The crises exposed vulnerabilities but also highlighted the power of preparation and collaboration. Sarah witnessed neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers coordinating resources, and technology providing early warnings. The experience reinforced lessons about the importance of integrated resilience, combining physical, social, and emotional dimensions. In the aftermath, the city held a memorial and celebration, honoring those affected and recognizing collective efforts. Sarah spoke about shadows and light, urging the community to hold on to hope while acknowledging challenges honestly. She emphasized that resilience was a journey without end, requiring ongoing commitment and compassion. The media coverage of the wildfire season brought national attention, sparking further interest and support for the corridors. Sarah's leadership was praised for balancing bold innovation with deep community engagement. Yet she remained mindful that accolades did not erase the complexities ahead. Reflecting on the dualities of shadows and light, Sarah found strength in paradox. She understood that embracing complexity, rather than seeking simple answers, was key to true resilience. The corridors embodied this balance, structures designed to withstand storms but also spaces alive with human stories, culture, and connection. What Elon Musk had said about LA was only part of the story. The full narrative included shadows that challenged them and light that sustained them. As Sarah stood at a nighttime event illuminating a mural with soft glowing lights, surrounded by families and friends, she felt the weight and wonder of the journey. The resilience corridors were a living testament to human courage, facing darkness with hope and forging a future where shadows and light coexisted, creating a richer, more vibrant community for all. The turning tides came slowly, like the gradual swell before a wave crashes onto shore, but when they arrived, their impact was undeniable. Sarah recognized that the resilience corridors had reached a pivotal moment, one where the momentum of years of hard work, collaboration, and innovation intersected with new challenges and opportunities demanding decisive action. The city's political landscape shifted with a recent election that brought fresh leadership eager to champion sustainability and equity but also cautious about fiscal responsibility and public opinion. These changes required Sarah to recalibrate strategies, build new alliances, and communicate the corridor's value in ways that resonated with diverse constituencies. The tides turning outward were also visible in technology. Advances in smart infrastructure, renewable energy, and data analytics promised to enhance the corridor's efficiency and responsiveness. Sarah's team worked closely with startups and research institutions, integrating sensors that monitored air quality, water levels, and energy use in real time. This data-driven approach allowed for rapid adjustments and proactive maintenance, reducing risks and improving user experience. Yet these technologies came with concerns about privacy, accessibility, and potential exclusion of those less familiar with digital tools. Sarah prioritized inclusive design, ensuring that technology empowered rather than alienated residents. Community workshops and training sessions helped build digital literacy and fostered trust. The tides turning inward involved the maturation of relationships within the corridor's ecosystems. Partnerships that had once been tentative grew stronger, characterized by mutual respect and shared vision. Sarah noticed a shift in how stakeholders communicated, more listening, less confrontation. Collaborative decision-making became the norm rather than the exception. This cultural evolution was as vital as any physical infrastructure, creating a foundation for sustained resilience. Economically, the turning tides manifested in new investments and job creation. Green industries, local enterprises, and social ventures flourished, supported by policies incentivizing sustainable practices and community ownership. The corridors became hubs of opportunity, attracting diverse talent and fostering entrepreneurship. Sarah celebrated these gains but remained vigilant against widening inequalities. She championed initiatives that prioritized workforce development for historically marginalized groups and ensured benefits were equitably distributed. The tides also revealed new challenges. Climate change impacts intensified unexpectedly, with severe storms and heat waves testing the corridor's limits. Infrastructure designed for past conditions faced strain, prompting urgent upgrades and redesigns. These events underscored the need for adaptive management and ongoing innovation. Sarah led rapid response teams and coordinated with emergency services, reinforcing preparedness and recovery protocols. Social tensions emerged as well. Rapid change stirred anxiety among some residents, while others felt left behind or unheard. Sarah listened attentively, convening dialogues that acknowledged fears and sought common ground. These conversations were difficult but necessary, revealing the human dimension of resilience often overshadowed by technical solutions. Through it all, Sarah drew strength from the corridors themselves, living ecosystems reflecting the dynamic interplay of nature, technology, and community. She marveled at how green spaces, solar arrays, and water systems intertwined with cultural centers, markets, and schools. The corridors were more than infrastructure, they were expressions of identity, hope, and collective action. A symbolic moment came when a tidal flood threatened a low-lying corridor. Thanks to early warning systems and community mobilization, residents evacuated safely, and damage was minimized. The event became a powerful lesson and rallying point, illustrating both vulnerability and strength. Sarah shared this story widely, emphasizing that resilience was about preparation, solidarity, and learning from adversity. As the tides turned, Sarah also reflected on her personal journey. The challenges and triumphs had shaped her leadership, teaching her the value of humility, flexibility, and empathy. She embraced uncertainty as a catalyst for creativity and growth. The support of family, friends, and colleagues grounded her, reminding her that resilience was a collective endeavor. Looking ahead, Sarah envisioned the corridors evolving into even more integrated systems, blending green infrastructure with digital networks, social innovation with economic development. She foresaw expanded regional collaborations addressing interconnected challenges like housing, transportation, and health. The turning tides were not an endpoint but a new phase of possibility and responsibility. What Elon Musk had said about LA had sparked curiosity and debate, but the real story was in the city's ongoing transformation, shaped by turning tides of technology, politics, community, and climate. Standing on a pier overlooking the Pacific, feeling the ocean's rhythm beneath her feet, Sarah felt a profound connection to the cycles of change and renewal. The resilience corridors were living proof that even in uncertainty, hope could turn tides toward a brighter future for all. The resilience corridors had come to a crossroads. Years of progress and setbacks, hope and hardship, had culminated in a moment of intense reflection and decision-making. Sarah felt the weight of the moment keenly, aware that the choices made now would shape the future trajectory of the city's resilience for decades to come. The crossroads was both literal and metaphorical. Physically, the corridors reached critical junctions where infrastructure, policy, and community interests intersected. These points required integrated solutions that balanced competing demands. Metaphorically, the project faced questions about scale, sustainability, and equity that demanded clarity of vision and courage. One of the central dilemmas involved expansion versus consolidation. Some advocates pushed for rapid growth of the corridors into new neighborhoods and neighboring cities, citing the ripple effects, momentum, and urgent climate threats. Others cautioned that spreading resources too thin risked undermining quality and community engagement. Sarah convened a series of forums and strategy sessions to navigate these tensions. She believed that the answer lay in a hybrid approach, targeted expansion coupled with deepening existing efforts to ensure robustness and inclusivity. At the crossroads, new partnerships emerged. Regional coalitions formed to coordinate resilience strategies across jurisdictions, sharing data, expertise, and funding. These collaborations promised greater scale and impact but also introduced complexity in governance and accountability. Sarah worked tirelessly to build trust and alignment among diverse stakeholders, emphasizing shared goals and transparent communication. Economic considerations loomed large. Funding streams from federal grants, philanthropic foundations, and private investors fluctuated with political and market conditions. Sarah and her team developed innovative financing models that blended public, private, and community resources, including social impact bonds and green banks. These mechanisms aimed to sustain the corridors beyond initial investments, embedding resilience into the city's financial fabric. Social equity remained a guiding principle at the crossroads. Community voices were center stage, ensuring that the corridors served those most vulnerable to climate and social risks. Sarah championed participatory budgeting processes, empowering residents to decide on priorities and allocations. She also pushed for policies that protected tenants, preserved cultural landmarks, and supported local businesses amid ongoing change. Technological innovation continued to reshape possibilities and challenges. Advances in artificial intelligence, renewable energy storage, and climate modeling offered tools to enhance the corridor's adaptability and efficiency. Yet ethical questions surfaced about data privacy, algorithmic bias, and digital divides. Sarah advocated for frameworks that prioritized human rights and inclusivity, embedding ethical oversight into tech deployment. At the crossroads, resilience was increasingly understood as a holistic concept, encompassing environmental health, economic vitality, social justice, and cultural richness. This multidimensional view required interdisciplinary expertise and integrated policymaking, blurring traditional silos. Sarah's leadership evolved to foster collaboration across sectors and scales. Personal challenges accompanied professional ones. The intensity of the crossroads moment tested Sarah's endurance and resolve. She grappled with self-doubt and the pressure of expectations, balanced against a deep commitment to the project's mission. Moments of reflection and self-care became essential, as did leaning on mentors and allies. The crossroads also sparked innovation in storytelling and communication. Sarah's team launched multimedia campaigns that shared the corridor's journey through voices of residents, artists, scientists, and policymakers. These narratives built empathy and engagement, reinforcing resilience as a shared responsibility. Looking forward, Sarah envisioned the crossroads as an invitation to co-create a future that was adaptable, inclusive, and just. She embraced the complexity and uncertainty inherent in this endeavor, seeing them as sources of strength rather than obstacles. What Elon Musk had said about LA was but one spark among many in this evolving story, a story defined by the courage to face crossroads and choose paths that honor both people and planet. Standing at the intersection of bustling streets and green corridors, Sarah felt a profound sense of possibility. The city's resilience was not a fixed state but a dynamic journey, shaped by the decisions made at every crossroads, big and small, by countless hands and hearts committed to building a better tomorrow. The story comes full circle. After years of relentless effort, unyielding hope, and countless moments of doubt, Sarah stood at the threshold of a new beginning, for herself, for the resilience corridors, and for the city she loved. What Elon Musk had said about LA was no longer just a headline or a spark, it had become a catalyst for transformation, a lens through which the city reimagined its future. The corridors had evolved beyond infrastructure, they were living, breathing entities infused with the spirit and stories of the communities that nurtured them. New beginnings often carry the weight of endings, and Sarah was mindful of the sacrifices made along the way. Families displaced despite the best efforts, dreams deferred, and battles fought quietly in the shadows. Yet from these struggles emerged profound lessons about love, sacrifice, and the power of collective will. Sarah reflected on her journey, the young idealist who once wondered if she could make a difference, now a leader entrusted with shaping resilient futures. She thought of the relationships forged, the friendships tested, the mentors who guided her, and the community members who became family. This chapter was not an endpoint but a continuation, a renewal of commitment. The corridors themselves embodied this ethos. Green spaces flourished, blending native plants with innovative designs that filtered air and water. Solar panels shimmered in the California sun, powering homes and streetlights. Community centers buzzed with activity, hosting workshops, celebrations, and dialogues that kept the spirit of inclusion alive. Economic revitalization took root, with small businesses thriving alongside new enterprises committed to sustainability and equity. Education programs nurtured the next generation of leaders, equipping youth with skills and passion to carry the mission forward. Sarah saw new beginnings in the faces of children playing in safe, shaded parks, in elders sharing stories of resilience and hope. In volunteers tending gardens that fed families, in activists pushing for justice and climate action. These scenes affirmed that resilience was not a solitary pursuit but a tapestry woven from diverse threads of experience and aspiration. Yet Sarah also understood that new beginnings required vigilance and adaptation. Climate change continued to challenge assumptions, technology evolved rapidly, and social dynamics shifted. The corridors had to remain flexible, responsive to emerging realities while grounded in core values. Governance structures were designed to be participatory and transparent, enabling ongoing dialogue and collective decision-making. The city embraced this new era with a renewed sense of purpose. Policies aligned with sustainability and equity became standard rather than exception. Partnerships expanded, crossing sectors and borders, recognizing that resilience was a shared global responsibility. Sarah engaged in international forums, sharing LA's story while learning from others, enriching the project's vision. On a personal level, Sarah embraced new beginnings by balancing leadership with self-care and relationships. She found joy in simple moments, sunsets over the Pacific, laughter with friends, quiet walks through the corridors she helped build. These moments nourished her soul and fueled her determination. The story concluded with a meaningful message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. This truth echoed through the corridors, in every act of kindness, every gesture of solidarity, every step taken toward a more just and resilient future. Sarah knew that the journey would continue beyond her, carried by the collective heartbeat of the city and its people. What Elon Musk had said about LA was just the beginning of a story much larger, one of transformation, hope, and enduring human spirit. As she looked toward the horizon, Sarah smiled, ready for whatever new beginnings awaited. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?